Today we're talking about men's facial hair within the medieval period, and it is a rabbit hole. Greetings adventurers, my name is Kramer and it is currently No Shave November, which is kind of a meme and also an excuse for adolescents to try to grow a mustache. Whilst using the actual month itself as a shield rather than their questionable life choices. But some people might not know that it is also to help raise awareness for men's health and fight cancer. Some people also just think of No Shave November as a way to get in touch with their masculinity over the course of a month. So there is a link to noshave.org down in the description. I am not affiliated with them at all, but I just thought it would be a nice thing to do because nobody likes cancer. There's also the strong possibility that you are not watching this in November at all. So in any event, you are here because you want to know how to increase your medieval or fantasy medieval aesthetic using your facial hair. This is not a breakdown of the entire history of men's facial hair styles through all of the medieval period because it is a topic that is almost more difficult to research than men's hair during the medieval period in general, especially because we are talking about a period of history that spans several hundred years. This is mostly a brief talk on history so that you can start applying medieval aesthetic to your everyday life now and then learn about more specific periods in history later. Facial hair was viewed differently for different age groups, classes, cultures, countries, regions within those countries, religion, and then the time period for all of those above categories. In fact, as far as I can tell, there's not a set medieval look that any certain people subscribed to, certainly not through the entirety of the medieval ages. And even if there was, it would most likely only be for the nobility, and even at that point, the difference in style would span such a large gap between culture, religion, etc., that to make any definitive statement about what you should do without knowing the specifics of your situation would be doing everybody an extreme disservice. Did some Vikings braid their beards? I think so. Which ones? Probably the rich ones. Which rich ones from which region? I have no idea. Should you do it? No, maybe. This is going to require a level of discretion and research on your part. If you're doing historical reenactment, that's going to require some very specific research for you, and you should start with looking at the time period that you're reenacting. If you're doing fantasy, medieval reenactment like Lord of the Rings, there are source materials for that, such as Tolkien's own descriptions of the characters and races and cultures, or the movies, or the original artwork from whatever books you happen to have. People have been removing their body or facial hair for centuries. People have also been growing out their facial hair for those exact same centuries, sometimes in directly neighboring regions. Being clean-shaven or having a beard seemed to vary greatly, much as modern trends seem to do today. Alexander the Great wanted his troops to be completely shaven, but in some Roman militaries, I believe, you had to have a mustache in order to join the military. Now, I know those aren't medieval. We can see from the Bayeux Tapestry that handlebar mustaches must have at least been relatively popular alongside people that were clean-shaven and had beards alike. In some cultures, growing a beard was reserved for if you were going through a period of mourning. And even up to today, some Asian cultures at least consider it disrespectful if you grow out your facial hair if both of your parents are still alive. It all just has so much nuance to it. The one thing I thought I would definitively be able to say is that no one sported the 5 o'clock shadow look, but then I found this art from a 800 AD French book called the Galon Sacramentary, which seems to show just that. Now, this man, I believe, is almost certainly a monk, given his haircut, and the hair on top of his head is growing in as well. So if I were to place bets, I would say that this passage is saying something about how monks need to shave more often in order to be presentable, and that those that don't deserve goodness, because that is the only sentence that Google Translate was able to decipher from this, but I don't speak Latin. There are other depictions I've found of men that appear to be sporting a stubble or 5 o'clock shadow, and I'll get into my theory about why I think this might be a little later in the video. I also found this depiction of a man with a very large mustache and stubble on his chin, and it looks strikingly similar to the monk from the Galon Sacramentary source. So if anybody knows why that is or what's going on here, please leave a comment below. Longer beards were generally associated with age and wisdom, and generally speaking across cultures also correlated with fertility or virility, much like having long hair. it also was referred to as barbaric, depending upon who you asked, while being clean-shaven was generally thought of as being more cleanly and more socially advanced, depending on who you asked. We see the beard with no mustache look is historical as well. For what reason, I'm not sure. As with most things, I suppose it was personal preference, societal expectations, and practicality all mixed together. We see chin straps, full beards, forked beards, pointed beards, fake beards, and a little bit later the Van Dyke came into fashion, but that doesn't mean that no one had it before this. In the 12th century, there was also a French abbot named Boucard who wrote a book entitled In Defense of Beards, and in it he details apparently 10 or so beard types and how to care for them. The text also remarks upon what we today would consider beard envy, and Boucard says that a well-trimmed beard was a symbol of strength, maturity, wisdom, and religion, but points out that only mustaches or a half beard was a monstrous sign. I couldn't find an English translation of this manuscript, but the British Library's blog article detailing this source is linked in the description as well. Much like today, if you had a beard worth showing off, you probably did, and if you couldn't grow a beard, you either shaved it or tried to grow it out anyway, maybe because you didn't have access to a razor. And if you were in a position of social power, perhaps you tried to convince the populace that not having a beard was, in fact, more cleanly and better, to make it seem more like a choice rather than a deficiency. And if you were a leader and you had a great beard, probably everybody else wanted a great beard too. Is this a lesson in the predictability of human nature? Probably. All this to say, there is a huge range of what might be acceptable for you. So my recommendation, my philosophy, is this. For those of us that are medieval romantics or fantasy reenactors, instead of trying to copy a specific medieval look, try copying the grooming methods that were used in the medieval period instead. You might not have the genes for a beard like this anyway, so I mean, I certainly don't. So set yourself up for success. But if you use the level of technology that was available to them in the time for your grooming, how you look will reasonably be an accurate depiction of how you would look if dropped into a medieval time period tomorrow. Ancient peoples had hair removal creams. Ingredients included animal feces, so that is something that I will not be doing. They also plucked their hairs, which sounds more painful and time-consuming than I would prefer, so I won't be doing that either, even though it's accurate, which leaves kind of only two options, which is to grow out your beard and only trim it with a pair of scissors, or shave with a straight razor, or a combination of both of those things. I read in some sources linked down in the description that the Anglo-Saxons, if I'm remembering correctly, actually greased their facial hair with lard or animal fat. So we know that there was, to some level, an amount of product application that happened. I'm not necessarily going to recommend that you do that. It's not going to smell very nice. You know, they may have used, you know, butter or something, I read as well. But we have beard oils today. That is something that we can use, and anachronistically think that we're doing the same thing that our ancestors did. But the most practical thing we could do is probably the most practical thing that they did. They had scissors and they had razors or knives. We use those to trim where it's needed. We have rudimentary styling products, and then however your beard looks is how your beard looks, probably. Now, I shave with a straight razor, a modern one at that. Medieval shaving razors and knives looked a good deal different than the ones we have today. This one's from the 15th century, and I do plan on upgrading at some point. Now, I'm not saying that you have to do this, nor am I recommending that you should if you don't feel comfortable, and I'm certainly not responsible if you try and then injure yourself. But that being said, it's also really not that difficult, and there are plenty of useful tutorials here on YouTube if you were to try to teach yourself. Medieval people probably didn't shave themselves though, as perhaps razors would have been too expensive or rare to justify having them for individual households, especially those of lower status. We also see in iconography that often when shaving is depicted, it is depicted as one person shaving another person, and in fact I haven't found depictions of people shaving themselves. That doesn't mean it didn't happen, it's just this is what I found so so far. This combined with the fact that reportedly mirrors of the time period were generally rather of poor quality, and it sort of makes sense why you would need someone else to do it for you. So go ahead and grab your best friend with the steadiest hands. I'm just kidding. Learn to do it yourself or go to a barber. Quick tangent on No Shave November though. I think it's fun. I think it's a good idea. It's got a good cause behind it, but what the hell are barbers supposed to do for the entire month of November? Just starve? I mean, I guess they can cut hair. I've romanticized the idea of how bathhouses function within a medieval society within my mind, but as far as I can tell, so long as you're within the right region and within the right time period, that's actually correct. They did have them and they were frequented frequently. In fact, there is a really cool YouTube channel that I like, IG14 Jarhunder, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it, but they are a 14th century Venetian reenactment group, and they have some really good content, and they explain bathhouses very nicely in this video. Shaving yourself with a straight razor, even though it might be anachronistic, is, in my opinion, a really nice way to add just a little bit of medieval anachronistic flair to your life. Just ritualize the whole thing, maybe play a little bit of that nice Witcher 3 meditation music in the background, and you'll see what I mean. Maybe even shave by candlelight if you're feeling confident. One thing to keep in mind though is that medieval folks probably didn't have access to really nice, sensitive, foaming shaving soaps. So in order to keep it as realistic as possible, you'd probably just want to use water, probably cold water, or maybe oil. But I have no idea, with the level of razor technology they had in the period, how pleasant this would have been. So it's definitely an experiment that I want to do in the future. Because if both plucking and shaving were rather unpleasant experiences, I wouldn't want to do it any more often than I had to, or could afford to for that matter if I was paying someone else to do it for me. So that might mean letting the harder to shave, more sensitive areas on your face grow hair while you only shave what you felt comfortable doing. So take this picture for example again. There might be any number of reasons why you might want to remove your mustache. Perhaps it just tickles your lip the wrong way or gets in the way when you're eating, but if shaving was not a particularly pleasant experience, I can imagine only shaving the lip and then leaving whatever else because it was more convenient. So by this logic, a 5 o'clock shadow would be more of a byproduct of the time between shaves rather than a style that you maintained on purpose like today. It would be actual 5 o'clock shadow, I guess. So in this case, we would need to see Aragorn's beard grow longer over the course of the movies in order to make it more believable. Oh wait, we do. It does. By the end of the third movie, Aragorn actually has a beard. So as always, Lord of the Rings always gets a pass. Setting aside, of course, that Master Tolkien has said that Aragorn actually couldn't grow a beard due to his elven heritage. Also, Halt from Ranger's Apprentice is described as a grizzled old ranger, and he shaves off his beard with his sax knife by just chopping it, I guess. So do whatever you feel comfortable with. Perhaps the average person didn't have access to razors for shaving at all, and the depictions of people that are clean shaven in tapestries and paintings are actually just people that are too young to have grown beards. And then you would trim as necessary with your knife or with scissors as you got older, and then you would stop trimming altogether when you got too old to care. Perhaps the artists of the time period used beards as a way of conveying age and wisdom more than they did any actual representation of the beard styles of the period. I don't know. Perhaps it's both. Maybe it's varied. All this to say, the more natural your beard, the more medieval you will look, generally. And the more primitive your grooming methods, the more natural your beard is likely to look. The only other consideration is that many of us still have to meet the modern standards for presentability, so our maintenance will probably be a lot more frequent. So choose a style that is easy to maintain and doesn't require electric modern tools, or specifically choose an ornate or hard-to-maintain style if you can justify it with the class or culture of the person that you are representing. Take the dwarves, for instance. Stay away from the shorter styles that need to be maintained with the beard trimmer unless your character is someone that is constantly spending around 3 to 4 days in the wild. But then shave everything off with a straight razor, you know, if you want to, and then let it grow back over that course to help increase immersion. Or just use a beard trimmer. I can't really tell you what to do. So my fellow adventurers, I hope this was helpful to give you a general idea of what to shoot for as we solidify our medieval aesthetic. I will see you next week with a new video, and in the meantime, I'd like to wish you good luck on your adventures.